Greetings to another video. Today we're going to do a highly requested video. Finally going to do it. Which is Garmin versus Wahoo. So this is the Garmin Edge 1000 and this is the Wahoo Roam. I used the Garmin for maybe 4 years and I've been using the Wahoo for about 6 months. I am going to start off by saying Wahoo did send me this to try out probably 6 months ago, but there was no kind of like, oh, you've got to make a video, you've got to talk positively about it. This is just my opinion on it, but I feel like I need to share that because you need to know, where I'm coming from with it. So I reckon let's just get straight into it. This is, or I should also say, this is not going to be some like in-depth review of all the different techie features. DC Rainmaker or GP Llama is going to be way better at that. This is just from my point of view, how I use them. And what I like and don't like about them both. So I'm going to split this up into 3 different sections just to make it simple. Usability, routing, and battery life, because for me, they are the 3 main things that I look at when I want a bike computer. So the first one, usability. So let's talk about the screens, because that's the main thing you're going to be looking at. The Garmin is kind of like more like an iPhone screen or like a phone screen. Whereas the Wahoo is more like a digital screen. And the actual, I don't know what they've used to actually, create the screens, but the Garmin is really reflective and glossy. So when you're in direct sunlight, it kind of reflects back. I did have a few problems with this. You just have to kind of move it to try and tilt it. Whereas the Wahoo has got a matte screen, so it doesn't matter if you're in direct sunlight, you can basically always see what's on the screen. So that's a massive plus for the Wahoo. So then we're going to talk about the buttons. So the Garmin is touchscreen, which I really liked. However, the main problem with the touchscreen is if it rains or you get water on it, the touchscreen would just lock. I've been so many times where it just locks when it's raining and it's so frustrating. So if you try to follow a route, for example, and it locks and you just have to wait or you have to dry it off and it's just a bit of a pain. And yeah, the buttons on it, I mean, they're okay. They're a little bit light, a little bit, almost a little bit rattly. And also the on button on mine. To be fair, I did have it 4 years, but the on button, it kind of broke off just from wear. Whereas the Wahoo, it's all buttons, so it's not touchscreen. When I first had it, one of the buttons was a little bit stiff. Which was a big change because the Garmin stuff is just very light, quick, just very quick to press, whereas the Wahoo, you have to be a little bit more kind of firm with it, I guess. But that has eased over time, and I feel like, again, over time, they will probably last better than the Garmin one did, just because they are a little bit tougher. Also, I guess what you've got to look at usability is, with the Garmin, pretty much everything that you do with that Garmin is done within the unit itself. So data screen, the data pages and just stuff like that is done within the unit. Whereas with the Wahoo, you do it on an app. So it's weird because I got so used to doing stuff within the thing. So to use an app felt really strange at first. But I actually prefer doing stuff in the app just because it's, everything's got an app. So I just like that and that it syncs so quickly with the Wahoo. But again, that you might prefer different, but for me, I do like having it on the app. Also, talking about buttons again, I do like the buttons. One thing that I really like that the Wahoo has is that on the side, it's got 2 up and down buttons. So say, for example, you're on a map page, you can kind of click the buttons and it'll zoom in and then zoom out, which is so helpful. So say you've got I think you can have up to 12 different data, what they call little data screens. You can either zoom in, so you just literally got 1 on there, so you might just want to see power, or you can zoom out so you can see all 12. It also works on the maps, and I find that really useful. So say I use this in Australia, so I went out, I can't remember even where I went, but I didn't know my way back. So rather than creating a route, I just basically zoomed out to kind of see where the line was and just aimed towards that line to get me home. Whereas on the Garmin, it's all done by a touchscreen. It's just a little bit slower, and sometimes obviously the touchscreen won't work. So I think it's much quicker with the buttons. So now let's talk about the routing features. Straight off, the Garmin, you have just a coloured line to follow, whereas on the Wahoo, you have like little chevrons. I prefer the chevrons only because, so for example, when you're using the Garmin, when it's just a line, say for example, you're doing kind of like a ride out somewhere and you're doing like a big loop and you're coming back on the same line. Sometimes I used to get to a point and I'd be like, oh, is it left or right? Because you could see the route all the way around and I wouldn't know which way it was, if that makes sense. Whereas on the Wahoo, because you've got the little arrow showing you which way, it would tell you obviously which way, which I prefer. Also with the routing, with the Garmin, you basically, if you want to find a different, like you want to go somewhere, you could kind of put a postcode within the unit itself. I actually never found that feature that good or accurate, to be honest, but it is there if you do need it. Whereas with the Wahoo, you can't, well, you actually can drop a pin on a map somewhere, but say you wanted to go quite a way away, it was off the map, you'd have to use the app for it. So you would just put like, take me to such and such a place, and then it would just sync with your unit. So I prefer that because you can be more specific on, on your phone on an app than you can on a smaller screen. But again, it depends if you want to carry your phone around. If you don't, then the Wahoo is going to be better for you because it's kind of all done within the unit itself. So yeah, that's the difference between those little bits. Also rerouting, to be fair, both of them reroute pretty good. I've not had any issues with rerouting of either of them. They've both worked fine. And then the different road types. So on the Garmin, I never really noticed a big difference in like whether it's a main road or a gravel road or whatever. Whereas with the Rover, and I guess that's what it was built for, you can really clearly see what kind of road it's going to be and what kind of track it is. So that's a massive plus if you are into do like off-road gravel kind of stuff. And then the other thing is actually getting routes onto the devices themselves. With the Garmin, it was a bit of a long job. You'd have to plug the Garmin in, open up the files, grab the GPX file, drop it into the new files folder and eject it. And then you'd have to check that the file was actually on the Garmin. Sometimes it wouldn't be. Whereas with the Wahoo, you literally just pair it with like either Strava, Komoot, Ride with GPS. You plot the route there and then it just syncs. It just automatically updates and the route is in the app. And then you just pair it with your device, which is just so much quicker. It's like wireless, it's easy, really, really quick. And I think Wahoo do that really well. Whereas with Garmin, I think they have started doing it as like an IQ app. But when I was using it, it wasn't very slick. It wasn't very fast and it wasn't very intuitive. So for example, I remember I was out and I needed to reroute. So I did I got the reroute, I did it on Strava, saved it, and when I tried to get it onto the device, it meant that you had to end the ride. So you couldn't just do it within that ride, you had to completely end the ride and start a new one, which is a bit annoying. Whereas with the Wahoo, you can just kind of change routes as many times as you want and it's still classed within that same ride. So it's just easier to reroute. And then we're going to go on to the battery. To start off, both of these units I was using with a power meter, so that's going to affect the battery because it's just spitting out data constantly on all the rides. But with the Garmin, I would get around, I would say between 7 and 8 hours. And because it used to drop quite quickly, well, I mean, it depends how quick you class an 8-hour ride. But I would always kind of turn down the brightness to save battery, and I would always make sure that I wasn't always on the route page, because if you were always on the route page, that would drain the battery faster as well, which isn't really ideal if you don't really know where you're going. Whereas with the Wahoo, I probably get about 15 hours, and that can be on the route page all the time. So the battery is a lot better, but the reason that the battery is better is because the screen is, like I say, more digital, whereas on the Garmin, it is more like a smartphone. It's a lot brighter, as in like the brightness of it, not like the visibility of it, but it is more like a smartphone. So it depends what you want. But for me, always will go for the better battery. You don't ever have to think about it. Whereas with the Garmin, I'd always be like, oh God, have I charged it? Have I charged it? Whereas with the Wahoo, I don't always necessarily have to worry about charging it. And the other bonus on the Wahoo is when you're charging it back up, it charges really fast. whereas the Garmin would take a lot longer. So again, it depends what you want it for. If you're going to do shorter rides that aren't going to take more than 8 hours, then the Garmin's going to be fine. Whereas for me, when I'm doing longer rides or, you know, multi-day like trips, then battery's like a massive factor. Also talking about the battery is the charging port. So the charging port on the Garmin is on the back. So say you're riding, you want to charge as you're riding, it's way more difficult to actually get the cable in. I've done it, but you had to kind of like not have the Garmin fully in the mount. You'd have to kind of have it half in the mount. So not ideal because it wouldn't be fully secure. Whereas with the Wahoo, the charging port is at the very bottom. So you could have it on your mount and then have a cable coming straight out, which again is a very small thing and it might not bother you. But for me, who wants potentially to charge when I'm riding, I'm going to be riding for more than 15 hours, then charging is important and battery life is important. So there are loads of features that I like about both. There is one feature that the Garmin, I think, has that the Wahoo doesn't, and that's the climbing page. So when you put a route into either of the devices, you get kind of an elevation profile of, you know, the climbs that you're going to be doing in that ride. The Garmin, though, has the page which is kind of like, it's got little grids, basically. And each of those grids is like, it says it's 500 meters. So for example, if I was doing a kilometer climb, you would see that on 2 of those grids that the climb would be over 2 of those squares. So it would show you it's going to be a kilometer. So for me, I like that. So I was like, right, the climb's going to be a kilometer. Whereas on the Wahoo, you kind of get the line of the elevation, but you don't necessarily know how long it's going to be. So I like to know how long a climb's going to be. And the Wahoo, you can't specifically tell. There's no way of telling what kind of distance each square is. So if that's something that's really important to you, then the Garmin does have that. I think there's an updated version of it as well on the newer Garmins as well, which I really like. But that one thing that I prefer on the Garmin is not enough for me to use Garmin, because the battery, the usability, like everything on the Wahoo for me just fits my type of riding, the type of stuff that I do way more. I do really like Garmin products, don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed using it, and to be fair, at the very start, it took me a long time, a couple of weeks at least, to get used to the new layout and how it all worked. But yeah, that is my take on which one I prefer. So battery life for me and the routing feature is just way outperforms the Edge 1000. So let me know your thoughts. I hope that has been helpful, and I will see you next video. Sorry, that's a long video on it. I was trying to make it short, but there's just so much to talk about. Right, are we ready? That's not even on the thing. I'm just going to share my honest opinions on, but I think it's a bit windy. I'm going to go back and do it at home. It's too windy, it's horrible. Greetings to another video. Today we're going to talk all about Wahoo first. Oh, damn it. It's going to go in the bloopers at the end.